We're already planning ahead for the 2021 fantasy football season, and you should be too. It's never too soon to start getting ahead of the competition in order to get an advantage on draft day. Let's start by talking about some players who had disappointing 2020 seasons, but could be due to rebound strong. Countdown to top five, starting with Ben Roethlisberger of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is this going to be Big Ben's last season in Pittsburgh? It looks that way contractually and, well, performance-wise. He's getting up there in age as well. Looks like it's going to be the last ride for Big Ben. Try to go for Super Bowl. It looked like the Steelers were on the way, and then everything kind of fell apart. And that included Big Ben's performance. But you know what? Even on the down note, especially, of course, for fantasy owners, week 14 and 15, major dud. Didn't even go for 200 passing yards either of those weeks until he finished on a strong note when it was too late and didn't matter. He did wind up still as the quarterback 14 for fantasy purposes on the season, and he threw the second most touchdowns of his career, actually, with 33. Remember the first half, the Steelers are one of the best teams and the best offenses in the league, and then all of a sudden, everyone's talking about Big Ben maybe being done. I think it's too soon to count him out. This offense has to work out some kinks, but several good receivers, Juju is not going to be back probably with Pittsburgh, but Deontay Johnson has stepped up and shown he can be the alpha dog there. Chase Claypool, of course, just entering his second year. James Washington, still a talented guy, and Eric Ebron at tight end. There's plenty of weapons to go around. Who knows who they'll add? Probably some offensive line help too in the offseason. So Big Ben could still be a nice low-end quarterback one for fantasy, a late-round quarterback. Not saying that you want to ride with him all season as your starter, but this is a guy that's too early to just completely count out. All right, now number 4, someone who's also been kind of dismissed as being too old. He's not really that old. AJ Green in Cincinnati, and I know it was a way up and down season for him. Start off with a couple of highs, surprising to see him back to his old level of production for just a brief moment. And then there were several games where he did nothing, literally nothing. And you'll notice that he had especially 2 zeros right after week 11, back-to-back games with no receptions, and then, of course, finishing his last season in Cincinnati with nothing in week 17. But what happened in week 11? Let's remember. Joe Burrow, their franchise quarterback now, got hurt, missed the rest of the year. Who knows if he'll be back to start the season, but it doesn't matter for AJ Green. He's going to go somewhere else. It was an inconsistent season all around for that offense. AJ Green isn't the only one who had that problem. We knew he was on the way out. He'll get a fresh start somewhere else. No, he's not one of these young up-and-coming receivers, but he still showed that he has plenty left in the tank. And you know what? He stayed healthy all season long. And I think that's a big accomplishment right there that we should point to, the fact that the injuries are not a concern anymore. He'll go somewhere else. And you know what? If he finds the right landing spot, I'm just saying, maybe Green Bay decides to add a veteran like him on the cheap, or even a team like Detroit, who's got a guy, Jared Goff, who can pass the ball. If he goes somewhere that he should get a guaranteed role as one of the top 3 receivers, this is a guy, again, that he's got the talent, and he's been written off a little bit too soon. So don't forget about AJ Green in your drafts. Number 3, let's talk about DJ Chark in Jacksonville. Definitely a disappointing season for him. He went from a 1,000-yard season in 2019, averaging 67 yards per game, finishing as the wide receiver 16 in fantasy purposes. A solid wide receiver 2 all year long, to a lot of people's surprise, kind of a waiver wire savior to a lot of people. Well, then last year, different story. Of course, the whole Jacksonville team was just a disaster, but especially on offense. So he was part of that, only averaged 54 yards per game, finished as the wide receiver 48 in fantasy. Now, we know that this probably has not much to do with him personally. Think about the rotation of Gardner Minshew, Jake Luton, and Mike Glennon at quarterback. We got some guys that were drafted late, weren't expected to even be starting at all, and none of them were really effective. This is a team that, well, I don't know if they were tanking for Trevor, but if they were, it worked. They're going to have a brand new quarterback, a franchise quarterback, the number 1 pick, one of the best quarterbacks to come out of the draft in years, a hugely high prospect. That alone is going to help. A new coaching staff, that's also going to help. Look, DJ Chark, he wasn't necessarily the problem last year. It was everything else on that offense except for James Robinson. But in the passing game, look, it's going to be revitalized. A lot of the other wide receivers on that team are going to be gone. Chark is going to remain in place. His 4th year, I think he could go back to and even exceed his 2019 numbers. So expect a big rebound from him. Number 2, well, What do we make of Joe Mixon? A lot of people, either firmly on one side of the fence or the other. Either you think he does have what it takes to be a bell cow back, or you think he's just the most overrated running back in the league. And there doesn't seem to be much in between. So it's hard to make much of 2020 for him because I know we're not supposed to be talking a lot about injured players because guys who were injured all year long, well, it's not about coming back. It's just about staying on the field. Mixon was a little bit of both. I mean, he did miss a lot of the season, to be fair, but he played 6 games before he basically missed the rest of the year, even though he was never put on IR. And they kept telling us he was going to come back, and he never came back. But in those first 6 games, think about what happened. He was massively disappointing, averaging 2.9 yards per carry, except for one game where he just blew up. And that was against Jacksonville, the team we just talked about with one of the worst run defenses in the league. So a monster game against the Jaguars and terrible, unstartable in fantasy every other week. And then he gets hurt and then he doesn't come back. So what do we make of Mixon? Is he a fantasy RB2 this coming year? I think he is because you know what? Joe Burrow, when he comes back, Joe Mixon, if he is indeed healthy, which he should be, again, it's not like he tore his ACL, not a serious injury like Burrow, but this offense is coming up. Look, I know a lot of people think that, well, maybe they should have gone in a different direction coaching wise. I'm not going to disagree with that, but still, this offense at times was clicking. I think that if they bolster their offensive line, Mixon is going to get the touches. They did not bring in more competition. I don't see them drafting running back, at least not early. They have other issues to address. So I do believe Mixon is still going to be their guy, which means he could be the guy in fantasy that gets you that regular, weekly, consistent performance as a fantasy RB2. Touches are the lifeblood of fantasy value, and that matters most. Mixon, not only rushing, but also receiving, getting a lot of touches each week. And I do believe in the talent. Now, the number one pick I have for bounce back candidate in 2021, it's got to be Zeke Elliott. Look, this is a guy that was drafted usually within the top 3, mostly as the RB3, sometimes the 3rd overall pick last year. Well, he finished as the RB11. Okay, 11th just in terms of running backs, did not deliver first round, barely second round value. That's not what you want if you have a top 3 pick, obviously, but we know what the reason was. It's all about Dak, right? In the first 5 games in which Dak Prescott was playing and starting healthy, Zeke averaged 107 total yards each of those games and about a touchdown per game. After that, totally different story. He wound up with a career low of 4 yards per carry, not fantasy relevant for several games. A lot of times, people didn't even want to start him in their lineup down the stretch. I can tell you, me personally, I benched him in a playoff game in favor of Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard taking some of his work away. There's legit concerns. Is Zeke Elliott a first rounder next year? The answer is absolutely yes. Dak will be back. This offense will be clicking on all cylinders, and they are bound to make improvements to the offensive line through the draft, through free agency, probably both. Look, this Cowboy offensive line isn't what it used to be either. It used to be the best in the league, and now they're kind of getting onto the lower half. So I believe with everything back to the way it kind of used to be in Dallas, I think that there's no doubt Zeke is a first rounder, and a lot of people won't have him even their top 5 at running back. I think he still belongs exactly where he was before as a top 5 running back. So expect a huge bounce back season from Ezekiel Elliott. All right, so hopefully that helped you talk about some of our strongest rebound candidates heading into 2021. If you're doing some early best ball drafts, some mock drafts, or you just want to know going into the offseason who to look out for that could be undervalued. We're going to have you covered all offseason long with content like this. Give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We appreciate it.